All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Miguel Padró, Assistant Director with the Aspen Institute Business and Society Program. I am joined by Aman Kidwai, leadership writer at Fortune and a producer of Fortune's Modern Board newsletter, which I highly recommend to everybody, and especially if you're interested in issues that are currently influencing boardroom conversations or will be influencing boardroom conversations in the future. And in a twist today, I am going to be interviewing the journalist because he is a pretty keen observer on a range of business and society issues that our program cares deeply about. And I'm really hoping to unpack a column he wrote a few weeks ago. And the title of that column was "The Business Case for Union Busting is Eroding." So I thought to myself, we must be living in interesting times when this iconic and proudly capitalist publication, Fortune, is leaning into an argument like this and leaning into so many stakeholder capitalism issues. Anyone who's followed Fortune over the last couple of years have noted, you almost can't help but notice how much they're leaning into this. So we have until about 12:30 today. So we're going to try and keep this as punchy as possible and cover as much interesting ground as we can in that time. So Aman, I'm going to start. Let's just give you a chance to riff a little bit. I want to know, you are an observer of context and the context surrounding business in this moment, as you're looking at where and how workers are trying to assert themselves these days. What makes this moment stand out to you? What makes it different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is a confluence of a lot of different forces working together to make this, new environment that we're discussing today. First and foremost is that workers have more options. They have the ability to interview for jobs relatively easily compared to before. They have the ability to interview across a wide range of geographies compared to before. And that has opened them up to the possibility that maybe they do want a different job. And that means maybe they want to be treated better. Maybe that means they want better work-life balance. Maybe that means they want a company that has a stronger ethical alignment with. Whatever the case may be, lots of people are feeling clearly the need to do something different, or to just exert the authority and power that they do have to try to make their workplaces better. And I think the other thing that's really notable about what's happening right now in terms of labor organizing, just to kind of dive into it, is we're seeing it across a wide range of industries. So, unions have a long and deep history, obviously, in this country. Many people have much deeper knowledge on that. But recently, we've seen unions pop up at Google and at Apple, which is a huge deal. Something that 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, people could not possibly imagine. And I think it all really, again, just boils down to workers. People have more choices. Therefore, they have a little bit more power. It has shifted towards them. Companies and employers are trying to figure out, how to be nicer employers, and that push is leading people to say, okay, we've been pretty silent about how we've been treated for some time, and now we're seeing at even places like Starbucks, which is considered one of the good hourly employers, part-time hourly employers. Places like Starbucks, this is happening. It's a lot of different factors, but I think, again, it boils down to really workers having more say, a little bit more power, and companies having to recognize that shift of power.
So you're talking in your piece, you talk very specifically, and you're speaking to boards, like you're speaking to directors. And I find this so interesting that what you suggest is that boards, it might be time to reconsider what is a kind of traditional posture or traditional playbook when it comes to workers asserting themselves. Is it just this confluence of factors coming together, or is that make now the time, or is it that the board playbook on this stuff in the past may have been insufficient too, but they just haven't been forced to confront it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of the latter where, and we've seen that broadly in the workplace. Lots of things were not sufficient, and only recently are, people feeling somewhat empowered to speak more strongly or advocate more strongly for themselves or for others. Yeah, I mean, I think the standard stance of companies being that we don't want unions, like if they're talking to their CEO or to their, in their board meetings, they don't want a worker union, right? And that has been pretty much the default stance. And maybe I discussed this with you in the past, but just reflecting on my education, my time outside of journalism in the business world, working in sales, working in consulting, the real business case is never really outlined much more than, these are bad, right? And they'll advocate for pay that's way too high, pay and benefits that's way too high and not sustainable. And what companies will say a lot is it would hurt our flexibility. It would hurt our ability to be flexible, with the times. So that kind of was always the case, or has always been the case, but never really stated. And I think what it boils down to, and what a lot of labor reporters and historians kind of circle around is that this boils down to power, right? They want to have that power over workers. It's kind of the same as the remote work conversation, right? It's not that it's not anything, they come up with a lot of very soft reasons why they need people in the office 5 days a week. But the reality is they need to monitor them for that 8 hours and for that 40 hours per week, because that's how they feel comfortable about themselves. And it's the same for unions. Their stance suggests that the idea of workers really having a seat at the table would be a problem for them, which is something today that is, people are just kind of, I think, seeing the logic of that and questioning it a little bit more. And that's why we're seeing, I think, more organizing and broader support for organizing today as well.
So I read a lot on these topics, and I'm starting to see more of this business case being made, but it's still not at the forefront of like labor conversations to me, at least as far as I can tell, and certainly not at the forefront of like business conversations about worker voice. And although I think that's probably changing, but you pointed out a few key pieces in your view, to this business case. So I'd love to know, so clearly you think there's value to worker voice and worker empowerment that could be had. So what are some areas where you think like worker insight, engagement, and power can help boards on issues they're wrestling with right now, that they say they care about? We see a lot of these. So what are some of those in your view?
One of the biggest ones is that, and this is something I hear from heads of HR all the time, we are a feedback culture. We love to collect employee feedback. We are constantly monitoring employee feedback and sentiment through a number of different channels and avenues. And that's great, right? You run engagement surveys, you do maybe pop-up surveys every week to a small handful of people so as not to fatigue them. Sure, all of that can be good, sure. I think anyone who has ever taken one of those surveys can realize the limitations of the feedback that you get, right? Even if you think it's anonymous, you're going to say, okay, well, if I'm, the only person on the marketing team who's been here for more than 5 years, and I click those demographics in they'll know who it is. If they really want to take a look at someone's responses, we don't know, right? When you're taking the survey, you really don't know the extent of the anonymity you're being granted there. For a lot of reasons, we know that companies don't get the full picture of feedback, right? Women and people of color are hesitant to share their full opinions. They're concerned with, pushback or retaliation. And I think if you are, again, in this era of companies attempting to position themselves as we empower workers, we care about our people, the idea of them having a union, of them having representation, a seat at the table, again, not the craziest to ask at all. That's a very strong sign, right? If you want to come off in this way, then you can recognize a union when they say they want to vote. You can voluntarily recognize. I'd challenge any company to tell me if they did that. The other thing is just today it's a PR hit, right? You cannot deny that Starbucks and REI are taking PR hits right now, and I think that's affecting them in their consumer market and in the talent market. So I think when you think about the fact that every single company is trying to figure out how do we keep our employees, and this idea that is already written into law, the existing law, that already has support in the case of many companies, exists, and it's kind of sitting right there. Again, it's like someone needs to really spell out how important this power is then, because you're taking a lot of hits, you're potentially hurting your ability to retain employees, and you're also passing on an opportunity to really involve workers in the direction of the company.
I want to go a little deeper in this kind of, you were talking about kind of the talent market. In your piece, you also lay out public sentiment as a factor, and the PR hits you're talking about start to get at that. I mean, my impression is that boards are very attuned to reputation, especially boards of companies that are, consumer facing. They're very attuned to reputation these days. Can you just kind of outline where public sentiment is on worker power and unions these days for anyone who's listening that isn't familiar with that data? And I'd also like to know from your perspective, is this a short-term blip as a result of kind of COVID sympathy, or is this a longer-term trend?
Mm-hmm. So opinions will vary on this, as you can imagine. But yeah, there's data from Gallup which suggests that right now support for unions is the highest it's been since 1965. We've also, there was a Fortune article that spoke to a few labor historians who said that really this sentiment has been ticking upwards since the last market crash, the 2007 recession. So, there was a time where it was starting to tick up over then. I do think there has part of this is a COVID sympathy push, but I think that push is sustainable. I don't think people change their minds on this issue lightly. And I think, the path for these, for a lot of people who from terms that we don't use anymore, but unskilled worker, right, to essential worker, to to where do we go forward, is a huge question that all of these companies have to answer, especially with automation taking some of these jobs away, especially with questioning around what's the career path for someone in these types of jobs. It comes down to kind of some fundamental things. Do you think people deserve to have meaningful work? Do you think people again deserve to have a voice in their working conditions, which feels very fundamental, but it's something that I think in a lot of cases people don't have. And I think just the awareness of the way companies operate and how some of these people practices work and how they have worked and how they have pinched retail and office workers alike. I think it's a very relatable story today. And for that reason, I think, we've seen sentiment rise. And I think it is something that, if you think about the sentiments of millennials and Gen Z and look at some of the data around that, Gen Z has very unfavorable views on capitalism writ large, and so these are things where if you're a company and you're thinking about, or a set of companies and you're trying to think about your reputation and how you're perceived, I think a lot of these companies should realize that they're being written off by some others, and that by the younger generations. Younger generations are maybe less likely to want to work at some of these financial institutions, at some of these oil and gas companies, or companies that work with them, or even these tech titans now, who we've seen lots of ethical challenges and conflicts with. So I think there's a heightened awareness broadly on the workplace, and that has in turn, after decades of really ignoring this segment or this opportunity with labor organizing, to say, okay, well, maybe this is the vehicle then for restoring some of that balance.
And I guess, I mean, from basic, if we build on public sentiment and where these trends are going, at some point that could translate into public policy and a different regulatory environment. It seems like, I mean, I'm 45 years old. My entire lifetime, the regulatory environment for worker power has gotten harder for workers and easier on companies. But do you sense now? I mean, we see some populism on, a lot of populism across the spectrum, across R's and D's, are you picking up signals that the regulatory environment around this could change as well? And how would that affect board thinking?
Well, I think first of all, one of the important things is that when it comes to unions, all of the laws are already written, and union busting, as it were, is also illegal. These very large companies are able to pay people, lawyers and consultants, to make sure that they push the limits of those laws, without maybe explicitly breaking them. But right now, the case is that any group of workers can form a union, or can mobilize to vote to form a union and gain recognition from the NLRB and a set of rights. So that all already exists. What we do expect today is that the Biden administration is going to be stronger on the enforcement of this. That's what they have said. What we've seen is a little bit their campaign, their efforts have been a little bit more rhetoric focused around. Biden made a statement around the time some Amazon warehouses were organizing. We have not seen as much in terms of activity, but there have been, in that Amazon case, for example, they did call for a revote. So the regulatory environment is shifting. It's not necessarily new laws or rules. It's really just enforcement of existing ones. Now, that being said, I do think there are some new initiatives and different laws in place aimed at supporting workers better. So I think where that public sentiment is going is it's going to lawmakers who are now more interested in pursuing things like, really simple things. Some of them can be stuff like right to work laws, or non-compete clauses in contracts, or wage theft from hourly workers who do non-work tasks, or who do work tasks while they're off the clock. I think there's, or even something like the pay ratio of a CEO to the median worker. Any of these things, I think, are aiming at addressing what has clearly been this realization that companies have not been doing right by workers by and large. Certainly, there are companies that do and have, but by and large, the work experience has been dictated by what businesses want. And I think, the regulatory environment is absolutely changing, and it's a huge part of the impetus for companies to start to change their minds in terms of their standard stance, because they can see what Amazon's going through. They can see what other companies are going to go through. It's going to be a tougher road, I think, for a lot of different reasons, and regulatory is one of them.
It does make it. I mean, personally, I find your business case on this pretty compelling. But I could also see someone finding that business case compelling and saying, see, we don't need a regulatory intervention. We don't need policy. If the business case is so strong, won't the market take care of itself? how would you kind of respond to?
Yeah, I would say if you're an employer and you're saying the market will take care of itself on this issue, what you're saying is we will address this if lots and lots of people leave. At which point it would already be too late, right? So it's a risk, right? And that's kind of the point that I'm making is that you employees don't want to create a union. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of difficulty. It leads to a bunch of very difficult conversations with friends and coworkers, in addition to your management. Such a large shout out to any of the organizers, out there who are doing this on top of their full-time job, right? In the interest of creating a better working environment. I think another thing that employers should maybe think about and realize is that the union is not started to be against a company. It's meant to be a way to work with the company, right? It's not a resistance group. We also want this company to succeed. We think the workers are a part of that. Let's then give them some of the authority and say in what their working conditions are. So I think that's an important factor for any employer to consider, really, is that a union and an organizing is not the first, second, or third choice of anyone. Their preference would be just to be paid well and treated well, such that they wouldn't have to pursue this avenue to begin with. And so I think the way to look at it should be it's a failure of management if your employees got to this point. And if you do have that failure of management, you should at that point feel the need to address it. The line that we have seen over and over and over is, and we believe in unions, but not for us in this case, which is it's a crazy line of reasoning. It's like a 6-year-old wouldn't get away with that if they tried it in a 2-sentence paper in first grade. But this is the reasoning that these large billion-dollar publicly traded companies are giving us. I just don't think that passes muster.
So I want to shift gears for a second. And so I'll actually reference another Fortune piece, actually. Back in December, I get the CEO Daily that Alan Murray and Dave Meyer produce. And in early December, there was a CEO Daily, and there was a conversation with Carol Tomei, who's the CEO of UPS. And I just want to quote from the piece, because it says, Tomei argues her Teamster union delivery force is a competitive advantage against the likes of FedEx and Amazon. And this is Tomei speaking, quote, I love them because they are part of the brand. The stories you hear about UPS drivers doing good in their communities, you don't hear that a lot about other players. And the story that was spent some time focusing on UPS having a metric that they actually take really seriously under Tomei's leadership, and it was that employees' likelihood to recommend as a place to work. So, like this stands out to me as an interesting example in the wild of a different posture towards worker power and unions. So we've already explored a bunch of the why boards should make peace with worker power in our time so far. In the remaining time, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how is this shift in boardrooms? Like, how could it take place? Do you have a guess on what the combination of things is that might need to happen for this to be more of like a common, almost default posture?
Yeah. I think it honestly aligns with a lot of what we are seeing and talking about in the corporate sphere, which is, pushes for social responsibility, pushes for greater emphasis on equity, on diversity. It starts by who's in the room. And the voice of workers via union is one of those answers, but it's also diversity in the boardroom, right? So you need to have a wider range of skill sets and previous experiences in the boardroom, which is a change that I think we are seeing and are going to see more of going forward. And then again, that needs to also apply and trickle down across the entire company. So you need a more diverse C-suite and executive and management teams, and at the very bottom too. So I think as companies become more diverse, I think they are also likely to see more of more improvement on that front. And I think the just advancements in talent strategy and where companies are going, kind of like you said. I mean, Carol Tomei talking about basically net promoter score for working at the company. Companies have tracked that kind of stuff. They're interested in it. They do engagement scores. They do exit surveys of employees that are leaving and stuff like that. But I think one of the answers is also more accountability around some of this HR data. They are able to be very, very sharp on the data and on the performance when it's their financial numbers, when it's operational efficiency. So I think if they can apply that same level of interest towards having good engagement metrics, having good retention scores, having good retention across race and gender, having a true commitment to diversity and making sure that leaders are held accountable for those is a big piece of it. So really improving talent strategy and looking at a new set of metrics there, I think is also the big one. And then, again, it doesn't need to be a union, right? I'm not here saying everyone needs a union. I'm saying, clearly the push is to treat your workers better. And if you reach this point where workers have organized and present you with the idea that this is what they want to do, I think companies should be more accepting of that and less combative. I'm not a corporate executive, so I don't know exactly what is going on. I can surmise what the motivations are, but like we've said, the business case for doing the standard union busting playbook, I think has a lot of flaws and something that, with new leaders, with new forms of accountability, I think that could be changed and change the default position even.
So that I have like 90 more questions for you, Aman. But I see we have maybe a couple minutes, and that feels like a really important point to kind of punctuate. One other question, I hope this doesn't kind of dilute what you just said, because I'm really curious. When you opened, you talked about how worker kind of assertiveness, shall we say, is happening across all kinds of industries and all kinds of jobs. It's factory floor, it's hospitality, it's also newsrooms and quote unquote knowledge work and Google. Do you think that the kind of common push that these very different types of workers, very different types of industries are pursuing, is that a potential bridge for kind of or an opportunity to solve some of the stratification we feel in society writ large? I mean, I'm thinking of business as a microcosm of society. Mm-hmm. And I know you've thought a lot about stratification in the economy. Just like you just riff on that as we close a little bit, and what opportunities might be there to kind of close those gaps as we see workers of all stripes and in all industries pursuing for something that feels similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear solidarity is important, and I think people who work in the corporate offices of, say, an Apple or an Amazon or a Starbucks, may want to consider, what those companies are doing with their hourly workers, and then within their stores and warehouses or with factories overseas. And I think, again, with the higher awareness around this, the likelihood of some sort of greater solidarity between office workers and, more hourly and part-time workers is something that is certainly possible. I think we have seen it, as I mentioned, with Google and Apple. Google is, I spoke to one of the organizers at Google, and one of the things they mentioned was that there is this stratification of workers there, not just of their corporate employees, right, who get the ping pong tables and the kegs and the what have you. There's a group of contractors who do the same exact work but are just not full-time employees. And then there's this support staff, right? There's this army of support staff that are on these campuses, right? They work the mailroom, they work the cafeteria, they, all of the different jobs that are needed. A great majority of that is done through contract workers. So I think those two groups, the office workers and part-time and hourly workers, we're reaching a point, because of where executive pay has gone, because of the differences, because of the way wealth has been concentrated, where those office workers feel more, potentially feel more, solidarity with the hourly workers than they do with the executive suite. And I think you can test that by, if you were to ask a middle manager at one of these companies, hey, the stock price went up 5% today. How do you feel, right? They maybe don't have that much of a tie to it as somebody a few levels up does. Certainly the hourly workers at Starbucks probably don't care very much about the stock of the company, So I think aligning people on goals is really important. And that possibility of kind of knowledge workers banding together with part-time workers is something to really think about, especially as empathy and sympathy is increasing across the entire working world.
Aman, this is terrific. Thank you so much for sharing all your insight and being so generous with it. I would encourage everyone who's listening today to sign up for the newsletter for the Modern Board. And this has been terrific. Thanks so much. And we thank everyone for joining us. And we will see you very soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.